Welcome to Swiss Holistic Institute, inviting you to this video podcast series on spiritual elderhood with Bob Weathers and Thomas Rüedi. Today's issue is 3 Steps into Oneness. So welcome everybody, and especially once again my dear friend Bob Weathers over the pond. We never met by swimming yet in the middle of the pond. It might be quite exhausting too. No, yeah, it's a pleasure to see you again, and it's once more our series we started some months ago about spiritual elderhood. We would like to dive into once again today, and today, since we announced last time, or Bob, you did it so nicely, that my book has been published in the meantime. So we will talk. I think it's quite an interesting view to look at this book, you know.
Yes,
At
yes.
this book out of an elder's perspective, because I think there is lots of contents. I think they have a special meaning because it's written also out of an elder's perspective, and since this is a little bit our focus. Elder's perspective in special, with a spiritual, background. So I think I would like to invite you to be with me within this issue today.
Thank you. Thank you, Tomas. I'm very happy to see you again as well, and welcome anybody who listens in to our conversation. A thought occurred to me, Tomas, and I can put this out there and you can see if it interests you or not, is that one of the themes throughout your book and throughout our conversations has been this relationship of the absolute and the relative. And what I was thinking of around elderhood for me, and I'd love to compare notes with you, is that from very early on in my own life, sometimes I think of my life in thirds, Let's say the first third of my life, I think I was pretty oriented towards the absolute in terms of spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
But as you and I have spoken, and we've both spoken favorably of Robert Augustus Masters,
Mm-hmm.
who wrote so eloquently around spiritual bypassing, it began to fall apart for me at the end of, for me, it was in and around age 30. That's just roughly. But by that time, that kind of spiritual bypassing, which was privileging the absolute at the expense of the relative, really began to fall apart. And I spent a good number of years, sometimes I think of it for the next 20 or even 30 years, really deepening into the relative. It didn't look a lot of it didn't look very spiritual, but it was absolutely required of me, I think. And I feel like I'm in the final third of my life now. I'm well into the final third of my life. That is, if I'm given more years. And I feel like it's the coming together of both of those that required that second phase of being pretty immersed in the world, let's say, or in the earth, as opposed to in heaven, was required of me. And it was confusing to me. And I made some serious mistakes along the way. But it doesn't, I don't know how I would have learned if I hadn't even made the mistakes I made. And so I want to put that out there because you've written the book and you're so steeped in this from multiple traditions, particularly Tibetan Buddhism, but so many, you're so conversant across Sufism, across other traditions as well, the Native American traditions, etc., that I've really come to see this third phase as the fruition of what came before.
Oh, yeah.
And it's neither one or the other. It's kind of a new synthesis of both of those for me. And I just offer that to you for anything that it might evoke in you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say as a youngster or teenager, or maybe as a young adult too, I was quite involved if you know in the relative world, uh, doing all kind of movements, doing music, doing because I didn't really like to go to school. I love to do lots of sports and there there have been quite some relationships in earlier times with the other gender, and so this is that kept me quite busy for a while. So, but it was, I think, in my life, it was like in the mid of my 20s. I came to Basel to study. This is a town in the in the um, in the north of Switzerland. So, and there I met quite different people also, and there I met for the first time some spiritual teachers, because Basel is one of the biggest cities in Switzerland, and also these times there has been quite some courses and some seminars to go to, and that was a great time. I mean, anyway, to be in at university, and I mean, it's a great time because you get there's such a lot of there's such a lot of choice, um, and then I get somehow caught, like hooked, like a and then it kept pulling me into really deep spiritual practices and quite serious times, and um, until I reached a point where I would say the same as you said. It was a moment, I would say, from now looking to this point in my life today, is saying it has been spiritual bypassing too, because yeah, it seems to be such a good idea to get lost of all this rubbish, around, and all this, um, so I had to find out, um, in the depth of being close to one of these great Tibetan Buddhist traditions like Dzogchen. I felt it's yeah, I get somehow burnt, I can't stay the closeness to the fire. And that was something I kept then stepping back, and now finally being back in my status now as I would say a yogi in the Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and where I really felt when I was starting to write this book, I felt called somehow to bring together things, and especially I think one of the major issues that brought me to this book is, um, I felt like that there was a voice saying, "Look out into the world. This this world looks like a world where relative wisdom is missing, and that was a very interesting point, because normally we talk about wisdom is absolute normally, and relative is not very well known, or in specific, so this is a little bit of my story, where how I brought these steps together. And in my book, as you know, there are these 3 steps, going from the relative, getting to know the relative, and getting to know the places where relative wisdom shows, and then and the second step is where the relative and the absolute meet, and where another kind of wisdom, a combined wisdom, is showing, or is we realize somehow, or we can somehow feel, and that brings us to the third step, that is oneness, so yeah, this is a little bit of the story where I'm coming from, and how it turned out. I was able to write this book.
I love hearing the backdrop. I love hearing your personal story. I know we will have talked about this in the past, but you're going to Basel to study is very touching to me. Like you said, opening you up to the whole smorgasbord of options and so on. And each one of us has such an individual story. You and I have such a deep connection, and there's parallels in our stories that for sure we've both been. I liked how you put it, caught on a hook, like a fish. And the same for me. The same for me. I really do relate to that. It isn't missed on me that Basel was the home of Carl Jung. You come in a wonderful tradition.
Oh, wow. All right, so you have been to Basel once.
He studied medicine, I think, at the University of Basel. So I think
wow.
It says a lot for Basel that it had both you as a student and Carl Jung as a student. That's beautiful to know. Yeah. I'd love to listen and to kind of follow you, Tomas, in terms of high points for you, especially from your book, especially as they pertain to spiritual elderhood. I really respect what you said earlier, that in the Buddhist tradition, the Dzogchen tradition, that you see yourself as a yogi, as a teacher, and I see you that way as well. That somebody who's a realized master who teaches, passes it on, and this is really what we're talking about as spiritual elders. I'll mention something very briefly, Tomas. Yesterday, I was an invited panel discussant for the annual conference for what's called philosophical counseling. It was held in the United States, but there were people from all around the world there. Oh. And it was my first interaction with them. But I want you to know, I've got actually the notes from that conversation right here. Yeah. That I feel like I represented you and me well. I feel like that I really brought an older person's perspective. In fact, the founder of this particular conference is from New York. Elliot Cohen is his name. And he introduced me at the beginning, and it was in the notes that he had. He says, Dr. Weathers has provided tens of thousands of clinical hours, and he just stopped there, and he just went, wow. And you and I both have seen clients our entire lives, and so it adds up. And I felt like there was a way of honoring that. And then he expressed real interest in whatever I might contribute. And let's put it in the language that you and I are using. I think what he was saying, let's have you, Bob, provide the perspective of a spiritual elder. And I felt like I was able to do that. The chair of the discussion was somebody that you and I both know of, Guy Duplessis from South Africa. Guy was on, and he chaired the discussion. And there was somebody from Harvard and different universities and so on. And then there was me from Southern California.
Right.
Guy wrote me later, and it was very touching to me. He said, He said he really appreciated what I brought. He says, "You were great." And I felt like what was great was representing the voice of an elder. And for that, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful it came through. So it's in that spirit that I would be interested to see your book and how it applies to our topic, our overall topic, which is spiritual elderhood.
Yeah, I think I've been picking my book up, like half an hour ago, and I was, just going a little bit along with the book, and I would say, and my impression was there's a life story somehow. There is something, collected. It's like when I was walking my path all these like 65 years now, I just picked up things, along the road, which I took with me, and put it in my rucksack, and in the end, it's a little bit like the picture. There was a moment when I was writing this book. There was a large table, and I put all these collected, symbols of my life up there, and with the perspective of an elder, I think they don't stay like just some spots on a table. They merge somehow to how I say, to a picture. They melt together to a picture. I think that's something what I really loved about my work when I was working 32 years as a holistic dentist, and I was did a lot of counseling too, talking to people about holistic, how to perform your life holistically, and so it's what I really loved during all my life as elder as I get is I get some information like here, or like I know some specific issues about the patient, and it comes into a picture. It comes into it's like how I say, it's like it's melting together to a picture, and out of this perspective you can see things connected, or you can see how it is connected, because it's connected anyway. I mean, it's just we don't understand. So, and this is something I really love about being elder, to have this again some quite spontaneous, to have this kind of panoramic view, or just like this, And of course, I think this is one thing is all the things I collected, but the other things is, I think, the deep spiritual behind it, because this is somehow the vessel, or the nectar. All these little things are, swimming in, and yeah, this is a little bit my view of an elder.
It's beautiful. I love listening to you. It's beautiful how you describe it. I love that you're acknowledging the nectar, which all of these little insights and awarenesses and discoveries that they're floating in that. I'll tell you what came to mind as I was listening to Thomas. Yeah. I started graduate school in the fall of 1979. I was the ripe old age of 24. And it was a 6-year doctoral program that I entered. And the very first year, there was a group of students that we were taking a course on counseling, and we were upstairs in this building. And this is in the days before internet, quite a bit before that. They had a closed circuit television. So that the founder of the school was down in the basement of this building, and he was doing therapy. Each week he'd do a session of therapy with a client that was volunteered, and then the students would be up above and we would watch him. We would watch him closed circuit. And I can still remember at age 24, he was probably 65, might have been even older at the time. I remember being astounded as I watched him, and I remember thinking to myself, it's as if he has like endless strands of experience and knowledge that he's applying. I had this image that if you have enough strands that nothing can fall through without touching various of those strands. It was a visual image. And I had the distinct awareness that I did not have that ability. It was humbling for me, and also, like I say, I was astonished. That image came up to me as I was listening to you. That one of the advantages of our elderhood, but it's only one because I want to talk about the nectar. One of the advantages is that now at age 68 for me, I turned 69 in May, is that I feel like there are all of these years, as for you, all the years of our lives, including our careers, where there are all of these kind of interwoven threads. I'm so struck by it because I continue to be very active in counseling. But all of that would just be the dimension of width or breadth, it seems like to me, if there wasn't what you talked about with the nectar, which is the dimension of depth. You and I have both been committed, respectively, to spiritual growth over all of these years as well. So it's not just having a lot of information, but it's tied into, one hopes at least, into the nectar. And the topic of yesterday's conference was philosophical counseling in treatment of addiction. And as you know, that's been my specialty for the last dozen years or so. Is that I offered to bring a case from just last Friday to the conversation. As it turned out, we didn't have time for it, and that was fine. And I won't go into detail about the case right now, but what I'm struck by is that not all of my work, Tomas, but more and more of it seems like to be that it's focused on the nectar, is that there are all these associations. But this particular session on Friday afternoon, just last week, just a few days ago, the client who is in his late 40s, just to give, is that what he's looking for isn't more knowledge just for knowledge's sake. He's looking for a way to connect it in a depthful way. And he acknowledged it. We both experienced it in the session. It makes this work so incredibly gratifying to me. And I think it has as much to do with nectar as it does with the little bits inside of the nectar. And I loved how you described it.
Yeah, so I think what I felt remembered when you were talking is the structure of the book says there's the 3 steps, but the 2 dimensions. So the dimension, the horizontal dimension and the vertical dimension. And I think if we somehow get stuck on this relative dimension, yeah, it's our world will stay quite flat, even if we know a lot, or we are, walking, how I say, big books, but in the end, if this is something that I really remember, like, I was writing into the preface about the differentiation between a maze and the labyrinth. I think this is a great. There are 2 great pictures, because I think most people can at least know what it means, but I think a lot of people don't know yet what is really the difference between the maze. I think everybody of us, I think we need to be in mazes in our lives, because this is part of, what maybe remembers us there must be something more, that cannot be it, just running, to just knock our heads on the next wall and to turn around and to turn around and to go to live a life that is about I say try and error. This is try and error is the mazes issue, and when we really go with the labyrinth, it's always one path. It's nothing else. It's just one path to the center. You go, and there are quite a lot of different shapes, but it's always you have to let go the path, You just go, you walk, keep on walking, just trust. And then you end up being in the center of the labyrinth, and there we might find answers to questions we took with us into the process. You could say a labyrinth is a process in our lives. Whatever it is about recovery. It's about relationship. It's about anything. Even spirituality. I think it's also you can get there and suddenly understand. There is something else. And then I think what for me is really important about the labyrinth is then the integration work of the process means you go all the way back. You don't just walk out. You go all the way. The same amount of time you needed to get into, you get to have out, and you have to have this patience to integrate. And that's why I'm a really I'm a fan of this symbol, and it's so ancient. It has been all over the world, in all cultures. It popped up somehow as a sign of wisdom,
I'm looking at you and listening to you right now, and I know that you know this, but right over your head, in the screen here, is the painting that you gave me, and it's the cover of your book. You might hold that book up. I don't know if you want to or not, but it's the first time that I've envisioned that. There you go. That's it right there. That's on my wall, as you know. It's right there on the wall. And so every day as I work, I get to visualize that. But you just added another depth dimension to it, is to visualize it as a labyrinth. It's not hard to envision it that way. So I want to thank you for that, because your painting informs me every day. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not looking at your painting. And it's like you say, it's in every culture across all wisdom traditions in the world. And you've just amplified it. It's beautiful, as you've talked about. And I do love your distinction between a maze and a labyrinth. Here's something that came to mind, Tomas. All those years ago when I started studying psychology, that first year, I took a course on assessing intelligence. This would be assessing what we call IQ, which would be more academic intelligence. And I still remember the definition that we were taught that year. And I remember a question that arose for me. The definition of intelligence at that point was speed of information processing. So we've measured all these tests that would measure how quickly you could, your response is my response. I remember writing in the notes of the book, on the margin of the book, what about depth of information processing? It was completely missing. That wasn't being assessed. And I don't think that, for the most part, intelligence tests, at least here in the United States, measure depth. It takes a different kind of yardstick, a different kind of ruler to measure depth. Is that we were measuring horizontally to follow your book. We were measuring horizontally, and we learned how to do that. The problem was it missed the pearl of great price, which would be the depth dimension that was not being assessed.
Yes, I feel remembered now when you talk about intelligence. I feel remembered on one of these um, chapters in my book about the blob. I don't know if
Remind
you
me of
remember.
it.
The blob is
Remind me.
a quite a tiny mixture of how I say mushroom and as a fungus and microorganism, and so it has no central brain at all. It has on its how I say it, these tentacles, it can flow, there with one of these tentacles there is a brain going, and there are lots others,
Great
and
image.
it does and they did some scientific work with it, and it's really astonishing intelligent. It can copy things, you ask him, how it would go through like uh, quite a difficult path on a road map, it would copy this exactly when you show it would copy it exactly. So it's always for me that was something I really loved about, thinking about what is intelligence, and how fixed we are to the point that intelligence is something that is coming out of our brains,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that's something, in my book that somehow it dissolves a little bit this kind of um, fixed um, pictures and structures we have about what is intelligence, or what is worthy, and what is worthless, or what is useful and what is not useful.
Yeah. You and I both gotten so much out of the work of the philosopher Ken Wilber. And one of the contributions he's made is based on the work of Howard Gardner at Harvard University, where Howard Gardner was the one that introduced this idea of multiple intelligences.
Yeah.
And I was trained to measure one, which would be, let's say, academic intelligence, one tentacle. And I've got several books on my shelf here by Dan Goleman, who wrote so much about emotional intelligence and then also social intelligence, both of which seem to matter a lot more to success in life, including in business, than does academic intelligence. Very, very smart people, IQ-wise, may fail miserably in life because they don't have emotional nor social intelligence. And then both you and I are aware of, in our respective traditions, that spiritual intelligence certainly demands attention. And to me, now we're getting more at the depth dimension, which isn't studied by psychology, and that's okay. Psychology sometimes forgets that it matters, but that it's really key, and that depth dimension, that all of the intelligence in the world without that depth dimension leaves us pretty empty and maybe not so smart after all. I also want to add one other piece too, is that Howard Gardner doesn't speak to this directly, maybe indirectly, but what I'm struck by is the role of creative intelligence, being able to combine things together in a way that they haven't been before, whether it be in art. Both you and I are music lovers, so in music, but also in scientific exploration and invention, and certainly in terms of relationships and professional applications. And though there's been a lot of work done on studying creativity, it seems like to me that we should introduce creativity as another dimension. And the goal would be not to be only spiritually intelligent or only academically intelligent, but to develop intelligences across the board. That's been a very freeing, liberating insight to me. And honestly, all of that work was done after I finished graduate school. So for the most part, my graduate school experience was focused on one line, academic intelligence, and that's fine, with no seeming attention, very little seeming attention to all the other developmental lines. They even have a couple developmental lines. You and I both probably have a fair bit of kinesthetic intelligence as athletes, both in sports. They measure that. You think of, especially world-class athletes are incredibly gifted, incredibly intelligent. And there's another one that I'm not gifted at all. My wife is culinary intelligence. Being able to cook well. I am definitely working on that one. So it just,
it's good for
you. Yeah. What I love about this is that it opens up the door then to embracing the intelligences that we've been gifted with and developing those. It also helps us explore the shadow, which would be those intelligences. I mentioned laughing, culinary intelligence, but my wife Colleen oftentimes scratches her head because she can't imagine that I don't remember a menu after having cooked the same dish a few times over time. And I don't. It's like, that's just not, it's not developed for me, which means I have to work on it harder than most people, certainly than she does. But it matters. It matters to have practical intelligences as well as more abstract or academic intelligences. So
yeah. So what I somehow spontaneously would like to bring up is for especially now when I get older, but before also, intuition has been a very strong pillar in my life, and I haven't been supported a lot with my intuition. I somehow had to learn to rely on it myself, So it's yeah, because it's on one hand it's very personal, I think. On the other hand, I think it's quite it's coming out of a broad space, and that's what I like. I remember myself having this put into my book, talking about intuition in a separate chapter. There has been quite a lot of scientific work done by HeartMath, as you might remember, saying there is a specific intuition called is a non-local intuition. So it hasn't been, it has no connection to things I have experienced already, or you can't. And there they open up somehow a door into the spiritual, and that's what I love because it's the heart wisdom, it's with heart, with heart met, there is this scientific work, but also there is this window that opens into the spiritual dimension where it informs us, and I think I believe that's what I have brought up in my book, and I think lots of other traditions are doing this as well, is saying that the heart is the door, between the, where relative and absolute, meet, and where relative and absolute wisdom meet, So.
Really, I really like what you're saying. I'm reminded, I mentioned Carl Jung earlier. I'm reminded of Carl Jung's writing about intuition. He compared it with sensation. His typology has been the basis of the Myers-Briggs type indicator and other kinds of instruments. That instrument is used really broadly in the United States. It's the most frequently used psychological instrument in the United States that's not looking at pathology or illness, it's looking at strengths. And there's this continuum of sensation versus intuition. Sensation would be the five senses, and it's typically more practical. I can't speak for Switzerland, but I can speak for the research that's been done in the United States, is that 75% of Americans are sensate, which is to say practical, which is that if you're at the other end of the continuum, intuition isn't the five senses as Jung understood, it's the sixth sense, which is something that is it's imagining what's possible, or it's feeling into something that may be not obvious through the five senses. And that by definition, you're in a minority in the US if you carry intuition as what he would call a primary function. And it is for me. In fact, when I've taken that test before, it's the highest for me, is the intuitive. Yeah. And so the complaint that people in the US will make about somebody who honors intuition is they'll say, he's impractical or she's impractical. They've got their head in the clouds. They're in an ivory tower. There's all kinds of negative attributions made. And so it tends to be minimized. The United States is far more guilty of this, I think, than Europe generally in terms of academic psychology. The United States prides itself on behaviorism, which is focusing on behaviors that you can measure. Whereas most of the contributions about the intuitive have come from, for us in the United States, have come from Europe, have come from Sigmund Freud, have come from Carl Jung, and those various traditions that have looked at the interior realm. It's no accident that the one contribution of American philosophy that stands out is American pragmatism. What's practical is what gets measured, and what gets measured is what is real. You and I are talking about finding a balance between the relative. It's not that the relative doesn't matter, but if it's not integrated with, as you put, with the absolute, it ends up being pretty shallow. That was Carl Jung's experience when he came to the United States. He said that there's just a very thin veneer, like on a piece of furniture, a very thin veneer that characterizes the American mind, which is not oriented towards what you're talking about right now, which is intuition. I couldn't agree with you more, the importance of it. And also, as you said, how it gets pushed to the margins here in the United States. Certainly has been, in my experience, been pushed to the margins, but I think collectively it also gets pushed to the margins. God help anybody that tries to champion. Can you imagine being a politician, especially in the United States? We could go into this one for sure. And being a dreamer, being intuitive, you would make it out of the starting gate in the United States because there's such an emphasis on what's practical, what you can measure. That's what's real to Americans, and that's a sad commentary.
Yeah, so it's a big issue, and coming back to on the other hand, when you were talking, I said to myself, I'm from Europe, like European, and on the other hand, I had some really significant inputs into Europe, especially also Germany. What was my, building up my expertise on holistic medicine, and on the other hand, I had lots of contacts over the pond, to Americans, and I think this is, and I have been over there seeing Esalen, and having seminars there, and having been to Sequoia, to these incredible parts that are there. And I think, interestingly, it seems to be the message seemed to be in a part of United States has reached a very rich and interested group of people. I would include you as well, and as well the integral movement, as well as others over there. So lots of deep work, and also the book of Shalman Schachter Shalomi. We were talking about for me, he's the father of of elderhood. You know, he's an American. I mean, he's. I think there's lots of. There's a group of people that they have. They have, you know, they have been able to understand and to work on this deeply. And that's when I was talking about elderhood. We have been talking before. Sometimes there is there hasn't been. I was looking around if there is some significant literature in Europe. There is not. There's especially in the German-speaking part of Europe. I wouldn't know about France or whatever, but I couldn't find anything meaningful, or it's ridiculous, and it's the same place as you said. This is the where Carl Jung and Freud, Sigmund Freud, is coming from. So it seems to be like just needing this kind of wisdom needs to travel somehow to being recognized and to travel back. The same time with, you know, as with Tibetan Buddhism, as far like 59, when the Chinese invasion was, all this precious knowledge and wisdom, traditional wisdom, came to the world, came to Europe, and have nobody would have known anything really meaningful about this before, you know. So this is, I think this is interesting, and I wanted to bring it up because of elderhood, you know, because there's no in German there is no word for elderhood. So this is something I really I can't understand, you know.
I'll say this, I know that we're close to winding down, but since the word elderhood, and I know that your book was translated into English, for which I'm grateful, the word elderhood, if it were to be used in conversational English, which would not be that frequent, it would only ever be to connote aging. Elderhood, that would mean she's old, he's old.
Okay.
And I think what you're bringing to it is spiritual elderhood in the tradition of Shakti Shalom. Is that is there a way? I want to say this to you. I read a really wonderful editorial in yesterday's New York Times. It's in the Sunday issue. It'd be February 18th, 2024, written by a woman. She was writing about what it is to be a woman moving into spiritual elderhood. She didn't use that language, but I know that there's at least interest. I told my wife about it. I was deeply touched by it. I actually get the chills in my body because it's so much of what you and I are wanting to express. She just named it and really did a fantastic job discussing it. Having said that, spiritual elderhood, I want to give that term to you or to Shakti Shalom for putting that out there, is that in the case in the article yesterday and in your book, is that we're talking about a different view of elderhood than just aging and decline. We're actually talking about aging into wisdom and actually the fruition of one's life, the way that you and I have been talking today. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, that article yesterday, it's a radical article, and she takes it on. She says, people associate aging with passivity, giving up, decline. And she said, why not it be a time of integration and continuing to push limits in terms of new boundaries, new insights? And she's not talking about becoming young again. She's talking about affirming being old and the fruit of that. It's exactly what you express in your book, and it's really the intention of this podcast. So I think spiritual elderhood deserves a place of lots of attention in the English language. Even those two words are English terms, spiritual and elderhood. They're rarely put together except for you, my friend, and for people, dear souls, like the father of spiritual elderhood, Rabbi Shakti Shalom. So we have a lot of work to do. The good thing is that there are people that are beginning to get the word out there. The New York Times is read by more people in the United States than any other newspaper. Yeah. It's a really good thing. it's a really good thing. So
I mean, it's a good sign that if this is possible, that somebody could bring and publish an article there in this issue. That means there must be some people in the newspaper, being sensitive on this issue. No, this is. I mean, it's a sign of hope. No.
I really hope so. I'll send you a link to the article. I mean, it's fresh off of the press yesterday. I read it yesterday, deeply touched by it. I'll send it to you. It does represent hope, Thomas. You're right. It does represent hope. Yeah.
Yes, and I think especially in these times, I think hope is something very precious, where you can see all these things going on. We won't be able to cover this and I think it would destroy the preciousness of our conversation, talking about the political system showing in America, or talking about these war zones in Gaza, and yeah, it's that there must be. I think maybe this is also, maybe this is one of the goals of this process we are into now, and maybe is that there are some more people showing up, talking up, about their personal wisdom, or their, as you said, this lady did in New York Times.
I'd be very happy to discuss with you in a future podcast how this applies to these times that we live in. The death this week of the major Soviet dissident, and the loss that is across the world, the grieving of that. And as you said, what's going on in Ukraine, in Gaza, the United States presidential elections upcoming, all of that. It's better to laugh than to cry. I'm right with you, Thomas.
Yeah.
I'm right with you. And I would love to bring that to our conversation about spiritual elderhood, because that could shed some really important light on the global conversations. I'd love to do that with you.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't have any time here. Is it what's up? Is it, did we reach to our
Yeah, I
the
need to
end
skip
of today's session?
It'll just be a little bit of a punctuation point in our conversation. I look forward to the next time that we're able to meet and to carry the conversation forward, Thomas. Thank you for this today. It's always such a grace to see you. It's much love and much respect to you.
Yeah, thank you for this talk once again, and it's a pleasure to see you in some weeks' time.